The opinions expressed on the radio program by the hosts, co-hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions and responsibility of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Genesis Radio, www.genesisradio.com, Genesis Radio's owners, management, or affiliates.
It's another Thoughtful Thursday, and you're on Reason for Reason, and I'm your host, Ron Yates. So today, I have a very good friend of mine who is probably, well, maybe 5 feet of pure fighting spirit. This lady I've known for some time now has been a fierce warrior in a fight to protect the rights of those who are immigrants in this country and who, at this time, under this current regime, this current Nazi regime, are being illegally kicked out of the country. I know most of us have heard about the fight, the ongoing fight between the Trump administration and the judiciary. Recently, they rounded up some people, immigrants, maybe immigrants, because we're not sure who was on these planes and their status. They were forced onto a plane and flown to El Salvador, I believe. Now, these people, we're told, are Venezuelans who are part of some very dangerous Venezuelan gang. All of these guys that were on this plane probably have less felonies than our current president, but they were put on this plane and flown to a country other than their home country, which is probably another violation of their rights. So to talk about it today is a good friend of mine and also a retired attorney and immigration lawyer from the West Coast, Sylvia Brandon Perez. Sylvia?
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I also come from Cuba, which is one of the countries that the United States is targeting.
Yeah, I lost your audio for a second, but I just was doing your introduction. Were you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let's get right into this. I have a question regarding this flight or these flights that took off. The judge actually issued the order prior to some of those planes actually taking off. They took off anyway in defiance of the judge's order. But I would think that a number of civil rights were violated. One, because if you are arrested, and let's talk a little bit about entering this country without proper documentation. Now, you and I had talked about this before, and in our previous discussion, you said that entering a country without proper documentation is not a criminal offense. It's actually a civil offense. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So for these guys and, men, women that have been rounded up and placed on these flights, one, it is a civil violation. These people are chained up hand and foot. And second, you're entitled to a hearing before being deported. You are entitled to a deportation hearing, are you not?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, these people never get to see a judge. I guess the Trump administration is basically judge, jury, and in this case, executioner. Because for some
Yes.
of these people who are not from El Salvador, these people were told are Venezuelans. And who else may be in the mix? I mean, I've heard stories of Native Americans being approached, asked for identification to prove that they are American, and they're being deported. And there's a case I saw yesterday. There is a man in New York, black man. His son is a New York City police officer. The father has been in this country countless years. He's a community activist. Well, he was just rounded up. And fortunately for him, the judge halted any deportation until more information is made available before the judge. And now, this judge that, and I can't think of his name, but the Trump administration and his lackeys have been attacking this judge, saying that he's a radical leftist, that he's anti-Trump. The judge says that he has some recourse against the Trump administration. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about that. What recourse does he have or can he take against Trump and his lackeys?
He is supposed to have a hearing. You're not allowed to deport anyone without a hearing. And you know, just to let you know, under international law, the right to travel without a visa is part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the world community signed after World War II. We're not, Trump is taking us out of the United Nations because Trump is, anyway, I'm not going to tell you.
Well, I think we've got to figure out what Trump is and who Trump is. But the judge is saying that there will be some sort of retribution. I'm just trying to figure out what sort of retribution could there be when Trump is, of course, the chief executive. He's in control of the judiciary. Pam Bondi, who was one of his defense attorneys, is now the attorney general. Kash Patel, who, or should I say Kash, I don't know nothing Patel, is the director of the FBI. I saw him yesterday when he was being questioned. In fact, the last 2 days, when he was being questioned about this leak of classified information. And his answer was, well, I don't know anything. I just got briefed last night. He was asked another question relative to this leak. I don't know. I don't know. But as soon as a Republican senator came on and congratulated him and then talked about cooperation between Mexico and the United States as it relates to border security, all of a sudden he had a firm grasp of the issue. But with him surrounded by his merry band of retards, what exactly can the judge do? What repercussions, legal repercussions, can the judge take against the Trump administration?
He would have to have a lot of guts, I want to say, because we have separation of powers in this country. In other
Well,
words,
we had.
no, that's the law. You can't, there are separate branches. You can't have, because otherwise you have a dictatorship, which
Well,
of
that's
course is
what.
what we.
Well, that's where we're headed. If we're not there already, some are saying we are in an autocratic society already.
Yes. You cannot be. What you're talking about, what they're trying to do is to have one branch, meaning a king.
Mhm.
Having just one branch of government. We have a legislative branch, and there are things that can only be decided, like, for example, the war. If you're going to go to war, the legislative is the one that decides that. He's deciding everything.
He is. And what's interesting is, since being in office, now Trump, when he was running for office, talked about all the wonderful things he was going to do and how on day one he was going to hit the ground running. He wanted bills on his desk. Since that time, Not a single bill has been introduced to the floor. Everything is everything is an executive order. So yesterday, the new executive order is now, as it relates to voting in this country, now in order to register to vote, you have to produce identification, government approved identification. So of course, I guess what he's doing is he's doing this in preparation for the 2026 midterm elections. I guess what he wants, well, I mean, look, let's be realistic. This has been going on for some time now. We've always had um, voters that were excluded from their right to vote. Black, brown, poor.
Exactly.
This has been um, it's been the American way of doing business as it relates to elections. But I guess he's going to, I guess, put a serious dent in those who are going to go to the polls in for the midterm, because a lot of people, listen to someone on the radio, what they're requiring is stuff like a passport, right? Most Americans don't have passports. Passports are expensive. I think they're over $100. So if you're
Yes.
barely getting by, right? Who has $100 to go get a passport just to register to vote in an upcoming election?
And passports are only needed for traveling. There's no reason why you are required to have a passport. Certainly not for voting.
It shouldn't be that way, but under some of these new laws that have come out, like I don't know if California has it, but here in Pennsylvania, we have the Real ID legislation, so that you have to get a new driver's license that is government approved. If you don't have that, you have to have another form of government approved identification just to get on a domestic flight. Forget traveling out of country. If I want to fly from
I,
here to California, I have to have government approved identification. Fortunately, I do.
I know. But as I said to you, they have deported Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans, when the United States took over Puerto Rico, have been citizens forever. And unless they're traveling out of the country, they don't need a passport. And what they said to the woman was, "You look like someone who needs special," because she wasn't white, and that's the
Right.
whole point.
And when you look at these mass roundups, you never see a European person. Everyone is black or brown. And this seems to be happening in the larger cities, in the urban areas, where, of course, people of color, and I hate to use that term, people of color, I'll stick with black and brown, because I asked somebody here at the station, I said, listen, I remember as a kid growing up, my aunts, uncles, those elder adults would use terms like colored people. Well, of course, that was looked upon as being derogatory at some point. Well, now we use people of color. Is there a difference between calling someone a colored person or a person of color? It seems like it's semantics to me. What do you think?
I think it's semantic. I do. And I think also, I mean, in the end, I had an argument the other day, and I said, you know, everybody, when they're being hurt, has
Right.
red blood. Okay, there isn't colored blood, there isn't blue blood, and none of that. And we should be treated as human beings. Period, in my opinion. But there's also in this country, for example, where you come from. As I said, I was born in Cuba, and Cuba has been under abuse since we won our independence in 1895. The United States invaded Cuba. That's why we have that horrible prison. So I am more than likely, my kids were laughing, but I said, this is not funny. I could be deported, even though I have a U.S. passport, because, they would say, well, they're taking people's passports and citizenship away. people in, like I said, they've been deporting Native Americans. Seriously.
Well, you know something? Under the Nazi regime, one of the things that they did was they rounded up the intelligentsia. And we see that happening. I just read an article about Columbia University and other prestigious universities around the country. The Trump administration is cutting funding. I mentioned Columbia because there you have the student, I can't remember his last name, but Mahmoud. I think he's a master's degree student who was protesting the treatment of the Palestinians. Columbia also has a Middle Eastern Studies program. The Trump administration has ordered that the Middle Eastern Studies program be shut down. Mahmoud is being held illegally simply because he's a Palestinian protester. All he wants is the war to stop and innocent women and children in Gaza to be allowed to live.
I think they also took him away in front of his
They
pregnant
did.
wife.
They did. They
If
did.
I, yeah, and what she needs to have a healthy baby is not to be terrified that her husband will be abused or killed. That's
Or
my opinion.
deported with no means to return to this country. And then I
Exactly.
saw the other day a doctoral student from Turkey. This woman has a student visa, which is not expired. A group of armed ICE agents approached her. The initial officer that approached her did not display any sort of ID, meaning a badge or anything. Just walked up to her, engaged her in conversation. The woman is trying to walk away simply because I don't know who you are. Then you see other officers begin to surround her. This woman was placed in handcuffs, put in a car, and now she is in Texas in a detention center. This woman has every right to be in this country. She has a government approved student visa. But this is an attack on the intelligentsia. So that if you take away the
Yeah.
people that are thinking, that are rational, then what you're left with are a bunch of, I don't know, MAGA sycophants who still believe that firing people, that tariffs on everything from chewing gum to cars and car parts, who think that we should take over Greenland, that we should also reoccupy the Panama Canal, and that we should interfere in things like the curriculum of a college, that we're going to withhold funding
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we don't like what they're teaching.
Well, also, it's also easier to manage a stupid population. You know what I'm saying by stupid,
Oh,
uneducated
absolutely.
population.
Very
Yeah.
easy to
So
control.
yeah, that's part of the problem.
Well,
So you know,
okay, so these people that now are in El Salvador, right, held in some of the worst prisons in El Salvador, who I guess they aren't having any sort of hearings in El Salvador because no crime has been committed in El Salvador. There's no proof that a crime has been committed here. What happens to those people? Is there any way that the judge could reverse the Trump administration's order and these people be brought back to this country?
well, that is what one of the judges held, and they did it anyway. They said, "Oops, they actually literally said that. Oops, we had, and they hadn't already moved them.
Right.
That's a lie. And the sad thing about El Salvador is this guy Bukele, who at one time was I want to say a different, he sold
Right.
out. And so they are using the worst prison. You know that they sent a bunch of people to Guantanamo
They
in
did.
my country, and that is a prison that has been used to torture people until they have no brain.
Well,
People who have never been convicted of a
right,
crime, by the way.
right. the people that were alleged enemy combatants from 9/11, and some are still
Yeah,
held in Guantanamo.
yeah, yeah. But the sad thing about all of this is that and that's what I'm saying. He's using the worst prisons anywhere because the idea you have. I don't know if you remember that. Uh, all the work that I did with School of the
Oh,
Americas
I
Watch.
certainly do.
Yeah, I mean, torture is on the curriculum of the United States Army.
Yeah. Well, you know
Seriously.
what? They changed the name of the School of the Americas.
Yeah, it's called the Western Hemisphere Institute of Security
Right.
Cooperation. It's still they're still doing
Right.
the same
And,
thing.
a lot of these despotic leaders, like I did a show a couple of weeks back, and we talked about the war in between Rwanda and uh, the Congo. I'm sorry, it escaped me for a second. So the president of Rwanda, I can't pronounce his last name, but his first name is Paul. I did a little research and found out that he did a little time in this country where he was studying with the military. And then he goes back to Africa and suddenly these wars break out. The big one, of course, we know was the Rwandan genocide. Well, now
Yep.
it's come out that the current president of Rwanda was behind the downing of the plane that killed the president of Rwanda, and that set in motion this whole Hutu Tutsi genocide that killed, I think, 800,000 people. They come
Yeah.
here and they study these torture techniques, and then they go back home. And of course, these folks are well funded by certain three-letter organizations. And as long as you will give us access to your vital resources, and Congo is loaded with vital resources.
Of course. You remember when they killed Lumumba? We in England killed Lumumba. He would have been a wonderful president.
Yeah. And it was actually Eisenhower that gave the order to kill Patrice Lumumba. I guess the word he used was
Yep.
neutralize him, because we're kind of gentle America. But yeah, he was.
We also removed the prime minister of Iran,
Yeah.
Mossadegh. I think
Uh-huh.
Mossadegh. And so I always say, when people say and this is you have no right to speak about a terrorist country when we are, and that's what during the apartheid thing, Nelson Mandela, who was on the terrorist list till the very end, said the United States is a terrorist nation. It is a terrorist
Well, we've been
nation.
terrorizing people around the world,
Exactly.
including people in this country that we terrorize, right? Now, years later, we're beginning to talk about things like David Koresh and what happened in Waco, Texas.
Yeah.
They created a whole backstory about David Koresh and child abuse and rape of young women, underage women. None of that was mentioned in the initial warrant to arrest David Koresh. They wanted to arrest him
Yeah.
for, I believe, one weapon he had sold that was an inch too short. The barrel was an inch too short. And, the sheriff in Waco said, look, if you want to arrest David Koresh, he comes into town every week to shop. All you have to do is wait for him. But of course, the ATF at that time was looking for increased funding. So they had to show where we're doing something. So they decided, we're going to go set up on this camp in Waco, out in the middle of nowhere. So there's very few witnesses that will see what's happening. And we're going to arrest this leader, not in town where it's safe for everyone. No, we're going to do it we're going to raid the compound. And now there is a television show out about it. that gives some insight into what happened inside from the perspective of the Branch Davidians. What happened inside in the days and weeks leading up to this assault. So, I mean, there's international terrorism, there's domestic terrorism. Don't forget the KKK and how friendly those guys were.
I know. I know.
And
I
they are
know.
a Christian organization.
Yeah, Christian. Yeah. I don't want to curse.
Listen, it's okay. It's okay. I get it. 'Cause sometimes you just have to say a few choice words, especially in a time we live in now when this country has arguably never been a democracy. But it is clear in the last 3 months that we are nowhere near a democracy, that we're heading to something very, very different.
No, actually, we can't forget that we were founded on genocide. We murdered, we had, the Trail of Tears, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, all the people that we brought from Africa and sold them. And even, everybody talks about Jefferson. He had the children. He never, he had his African mistress
Sally
or
Hemings.
whatever. And yeah, but he never gave freedom to those children, his own children.
Right,
Give me a
right.
break. And it's like everybody says, everybody talks about Winston Churchill. He was one of the most racist individuals on the planet. He used to say that just because there were a lot of indigenous people and black people didn't mean that they had any rights, because they weren't full human beings.
Right.
Seriously. So I always say to people, your heroes are not my heroes. Okay.
Yeah. It is really sad that more people in this country are completely unaware or just don't want to know what's happening.
That's it. They
Because
don't
there are
want to
so
know.
many people that, I see it on social media. They say, well, this guy, Elon Musk, is a genius. Well, I don't know. I mean, he keeps having rocket ships blow up before they get off the launching pad. I mean, if you set up 10 rockets and only 6 make it, right? That's 60%. That doesn't qualify as being a genius. And he's not the one who is figuring out the intricate mathematics and physics and everything else it takes to launch these things. He's just possibly the money, right? Or the person who goes out and gets the money. But genius, no. Donald Trump, when he ran the first time, he called himself a stable genius.
Yeah. Yeah. In what universe he's a stable genius?
Well, a lot of people think that Trump is a really smart guy because not based on reality, but based on what they saw when he was doing the show The Apprentice. He appeared to be in charge. He appeared to have a good knowledge of business.
You remember what his favorite words were?
Right.
You're fired.
And you know what? He's still using those favorite words, but he's doing it to people like the people who run our nuclear programs. You fire them.
Exactly.
And then you realize, wait a minute. We don't have any people to run our nuclear program. So now you go and hire them back. And many of the people that are fired, now judges are ordering that they be rehired because, we have laws in this country. Laws for hiring as well as for firing. We're just arbitrarily saying, I am the president. I can fire whoever I want.
Well, I think he's, like I said, he has destroyed the separation of powers doctrine, which is one of the most essential doctrine. And it's because we didn't want a king. We wanted to have a country that would be run by law. And again, I know that the hypocrisy, I know it. I've been writing about this forever. But at least we had an attempt, But we think about all the presidents that we put up, that, I always say, Al Gore won the election. You remember that. We were working on that. and so did Dennis Kucinich. And so, I don't trust, I have to say to you, when the Democrats and Republicans are recommending something, I want to look to see where the rot is, because there's
Right.
always rot.
I'm going to open
you
up the
know
phone line to see if anyone has any questions for you relative to immigration law. So the number is 888
okay.
304 4401. Again, 888 304 4401. If you know someone that is currently being held, if you know someone that has had contact with immigration or ICE and is currently under a detainer to appear before a immigration judge, which is unlikely since they're bypassing judges. But if you do and you have questions, call in 888 304 4401. Now, I know you said that the judge in the deportation case where the planes were actually on the ground and took off anyway in defiance of his order. So I know he tried to have some of those planes return and have these people brought before him for hearing, because no one knows who's on those planes. I mean, the people that know would
Yep.
be the people that illegally abducted them and placed them on the planes. But other than that, you have a government that is telling the American people that these people are criminals and that they've committed some heinous crimes. Well, if that's the case, why are none of these people brought up on charges in this country and tried?
I'm going to explain something about the criminality. Okay, so say that you came in with a permit or something like that, and all of a sudden, back in El Salvador or wherever you are, your mother is dying, so you have to go back. When you return, if there's a deportation, if you're under deportation proceedings, then they say you're a criminal because you came and you didn't have the right to come. But you haven't committed a heinous act. You went to see your mother, who was dying. Do you
Right.
understand what I'm saying? And so, the way they define criminality isn't doesn't make any sense. And the other thing is, and I say this because I have done so many immigration cases. The officers who arrest these people are inhuman. They really are. They're not. I don't know if you've seen any of the arrests, where they grab people, even children. I can't tell you in California how many babies have died in immigration custody.
I'll tell
Babies.
you something, right? One of the big problems with this uh, immigration fiasco is the fact that the Trump administration actually set quotas for ICE to go out and round up a certain
Yep.
number of people per day. They wanted to see, and still want to see, a certain number of deportations weekly. When you do that, you put pressure from the top down to go out and fill the planes, fill the holding cells. So when in the case of this woman, this Turkish doctoral student, they walked up to this woman. They didn't know who she was, but what they saw, she was wearing a hijab.
Yep.
So, okay, she's wearing a hijab. That means she's possibly Muslim, right? So they would assume she's Muslim. So we're going to go up to her, and despite the fact that she has a student visa allowing her to be in this country, we don't care because there's pressure on us for numbers, right? And
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
Trump isn't backing off of this. He's out there. He has this bulldog-looking guy, Tom Homan, out there. You know, kind of like leading the charge. Hey guys, go out, keep it going, round them up wherever you find them. Round them up. Don't worry about the court system. Don't worry about civil rights. Don't worry about violating the Constitution. You just grab them, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, it's awful.
It really is, and yet people still think that, America is the shining city on the hill, right? And that
Yeah,
we are somehow entitled to do this to human beings.
exactly,
You know,
exactly. There was a woman. There's an Indian woman that I like a lot, and I saw her in Berkeley, and she said something that made me laugh. She said, "So they want to go to Mars, and we are volunteering to drive them to the airport to let them go to Mars, but they
right.
can't come back."
One-way trip,
And I-
one-way trip.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, with these authoritarian regimes, right? For the most part, it does not end well. We saw what happened in World War II, and arguably at the start of Hitler's regime, there was some things that he did that were good for Germany. Like the Autobahn, right? Um, the Volkswagen, that program was started under the Nazis, right? So there
yeah,
was some things that helped to bolster the German economy, but in the long run, it didn't end well. And one of my favorite movies is a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg.
oh yeah,
And
oh
all
yeah,
of these judges are now being tried for their complete abandonment of the law in favor of their loyalty to one man, Adolf Hitler. And now you have Donald J. Trump, or Don Trumpioni, who,
I call I call him MacFarlane because he has Scottish
well,
Scottish
he's got
descent.
some German descent too. So Don
Yeah,
Trumpioni, what he talks about is loyalty, not about allegiance to this country, allegiance to the Constitution. That is all secondary. What is primary in his mind is allegiance to him. And you have a legislative branch that is allowing Trump to run roughshod over the Constitution and the people of this country. And yet they are
yeah,
remaining silent. For these Republicans in some of these states like Wyoming, here in Pennsylvania, they just had a special election, a seat that was held by the Republicans. It flipped just the other day. So for the Republicans that are going to these town hall meetings and are telling their constituents, well, look, all Elon Musk is doing the job that the president asked him to do. Well, why does Elon Musk need my information, my social security information? Why does he need my social security number? Why does he need to know what I receive on a monthly basis? What does it matter to him what doctors I go to if I have Medicaid and Medicare? What business is that of his?
because he said it was a Ponzi scheme, is what he said,
Yeah,
and and he also said that empathy is one of the worst things a human being
yeah.
can do.
I saw a post on Facebook today. We were talking about in South Africa how there was land that was being reappropriated and given back to the black farmers. Land that was taken from them, in the 19th century. Well, of
Yep.
course, Elon Muskrat wrote this kind of lengthy post on Facebook trying to get empathy, which he said is a bad thing, for these white farmers who he feels is being treated so unfairly. Trump wants to bring some of these farmers to this country. Well, what land are they going to farm? If you are a farmer in South Africa, if that's what you know, when you come to this country, what land are you going to farm? Are they going to take land from some of American farmers? and give them to the South African?
Well, think about all the people that work the land in, for example, and I'm just giving you California because it's the fifth largest. It's a huge state, right? And everybody that grows our food, most of them are Mexicans or Salvadorans or whatever. Who's if they deport them all? Because I'm telling you, no, no black, no white Republican is going to be able to grow the food. So
Well, I'll tell you something. There is now legislation working its way through the Florida legislature. They want to now have children as young as 14 working the fields. Yeah.
yeah,
So they're trying to find a way to offset the massive loss of labor, right? But 14-year-olds working under those conditions.
I have to remind people all the time here about Walmart. Walmart is the largest employer in the world, and they have been found guilty of child labor laws again and
And
again.
nothing's up.
You, yeah, no, but I mean, you want to, support somebody who's causing children to die at work. Amazon. Amazon also is. I mean, it's destroying the manufacturing system because they and yeah, I'm losing my but I mean it's ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. I don't even know how to put it.
Probably the only time in this country where we had zero unemployment was during the slave years, during the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah,
And of course,
yeah.
America and the European allies, gained enormous wealth. You don't have to pay people. You don't have to provide health care. You don't have to provide a pension. You don't have.
He actually said that he hated. Trump said that he hated paying
Right,
overtime. What kind of
right,
comment is
right.
that?
And yet, again, people think that Don Trumpioni is a genius. Yet,
Yeah.
if you just look at the current conditions in this country, when Trumpioni was running for office, he said, "I'm going to make America profitable again." He said he's going to end the war between Ukraine and Russia on day one. He said he's going to bring down the rising cost of living, drive inflation down. Well, since taking office, costs have gone up. The stock market is tanking. He's talking about buying Greenland, which is not for sale. Where's the money going to come from? He's firing people indiscriminately, no hearing, just, well, you know what? Not even a notification from a supervisor. Some of these folks are fired by email or text message. Don't come to work anymore.
I know.
What do you mean don't come to work anymore? And he's closing veteran centers, people that put their life on the line for this country.
Yep. Oh, the veterans thing makes me really angry because one thing is not to be for war, which I never have been. My first husband served in Vietnam. But the point is, once you've done that and you are screwed up for life from the horrible things you've seen, you're entitled to, health care and things like that. I mean, that is beyond atrocious, you know. And then, the stupid whoever it is who recently said, well, if they're not willing, no, they don't have to be willing to do anything. They already did all of that
Right,
stuff.
right.
Serious.
Well, it's just, I don't know. Something is wrong with people, right? When a billionaire like the current Treasury Secretary goes on national TV. Now, this is after Elon Musk shows up with his toy chainsaw and says, "This is what I'm doing to Americans' jobs and lives," right? He didn't use those words, but he's waving around this chainsaw. That was a slap in the face. But then the
Yep.
Treasury Secretary goes on I think it was Fox News, And he says, listen, if my mother-in-law did not get her Social Security check, she's not going to complain. She's going to say something got messed up. Now, okay, you are a billionaire. Why would this woman whose daughter is married to a billionaire, why would she need a Social Security check? Right? That's
Yeah.
number one. A billionaire. This woman don't need Social Security. There are people in this country who are constantly denied Social Security who actually really need, who don't have billionaire son-in-laws. And then he went on to say that the people that complain are fraudsters.
I know.
Not the
I know.
Trump administration that is turning the Constitution upside on its head, driving people out of work, destroying what's left of the economy. They're not the fraudsters. A 34-time convicted felon, oh, no fraud here. But the people who've worked their entire lives putting money into this system for 30, 40, 50 years, who now have to use that to survive, those are the fraudsters.
You know what I remember? I was there because it was during the time when a lot of people were going bankrupt because they had been sold bad loans. And Donald Trump filed his first bankruptcy for one of the casinos. I'm assuming it was the Taj Mahal, but I
Taj
don't
Mahal.
remember. And and you know what? None of the people who built the damn casinos got paid. And you tell me that that's fair?
Well,
The people who built casinos were not
right.
paid.
Well, realistically, if people would have just done a little research, and it doesn't take much, everybody has a phone. They call it a smartphone. It is a smart device, unfortunately for dumb people. But if you Google Donald Trump and the businesses that he started, right? How many are still operating? You know,
You don't want me to answer that, right?
I grew up in New York, right? So I remember Trump Airlines. I don't know, did that last 6 months, maybe? I remember Trump
The
University,
university
right? I
fraud.
remember Trump Taj
Remember?
Mahal. I think he spent $1 billion on this one casino. And in his stably genius mind of his, he believed that his casino would make $1 million per day, which was that would have been required just to meet the loans to the banks and his operating costs. They told him, Mr. Trump, no casino makes $1 million a day. But he said, well, you know what? This one will, because the name Trump is on it. Nobody in their right mind is going to go to any other casino than a casino with the name Trump attached to it. Sylvia? I think we lost our guest. But anyway, what's happening in this country is insane, right? It is the definition of insanity. When you do the same things over and over and over and expect a different result, it is insanity. And that's what's happening. Every 4 years, we go to our polling places and we say we're going to vote out one party and put the people that sit directly across from them into office. What really changes? Poor people are still getting poorer. I don't care if there's a Republican in the White House or a Democrat, poor people remain poor. Working class people have been under attack economically going back to the Reagan years. I looked it up. The last time there was wage increases commensurate with the cost of living was 1973. I mean, 52 years ago. Since then, since then, what we have is these paltry increases, these cost of living increases that are way below the cost of living. So even though you get a $10 raise, and let's use Pennsylvania as an example. Here in the state of Pennsylvania, the governor signed legislation to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It currently stands at, I believe, $7.25 or $7.50. How do you make it on $7.25 or $7.50 an hour when the average rent for the, and not even a luxury apartment, a simple box with a bed and a toilet is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 to $1,500 a month?
Oh yeah.
And that does not include food. Doesn't include that, right? Doesn't include things like electricity. Forget television, just electricity to keep the lights on, to have some hot water, some refrigeration. How do you survive on what this country that is claims to be so wealthy wants to pay?
Well, but it is wealthy, but it's wealthy for the rich.
And the rich don't want to pay taxes, and they don't want to pay their workers, because
Yeah.
we're still dealing with, in Pennsylvania, just over $7 an hour. How do you survive? And a lot of our elected officials will say, well, we don't want to raise the minimum wage because it'll have a negative effect on business. Well, you raise taxes, and that has a negative effect on working class and poor people, but you don't stop doing that. In New York City, and I know, Sylvia, you've been on the West Coast for a number of years now. But in New York City, what they decided to do, since there was a budget shortfall in the New York City transit budget, they decided to institute a $9 tariff. Every car entering New York City below 60th Street in Manhattan would have to pay an additional $9 on top of the Port Authority tolls, which I think are currently at about $16 or $17 to come into New York State. So now, instead of paying $16, $17, you're looking at paying $25 or $26 just to come to work.
Yeah, yeah.
That has no effect on rich people.
I think you guys have the highest tolls that I in all the places that I've been, to. I really do. And I also think we shouldn't even be. We should. What we should be trying to do is to have people thrive, not just survive. People are entitled to thrive, to have a decent, not to be. Everybody is very close to being homeless. All you have to do is, have a disease, and you can't pay the fees, and I mean, our taxes have been in California and our, everything has gone up tremendously, exponentially.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so they can take your house away. I don't know if you remember my friend Moeen, who lives in Maryland. Moeen made the mistake of getting a, what do you call it, a reverse mortgage.
Yeah.
And she's older than me. She's like 78 years old. And she is, has served so much. She was the first black congresswoman in her area. And she has a kidney problem.
Wow.
And they're trying to sell her house. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's inhuman, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Inhuman.
Right. And you know what? That's happening all across this country.
Yeah.
The working class has been squeezed, and the grip is just getting tighter. We go back to, Reagan, called a great communicator, but Reagan was the one that started breaking the labor unions.
Oh, I know.
It was Reagan that came up with this wonderful idea of trickle down economics, Well, it's raining up top, but by the time it gets to us, it's just a mere trickle. And, you know, 40 plus years later, we're still dealing with the trickle. And you know what? It seems in many cases, in many instances, that the trickle has been shut off. Really nothing. And, you know, if you look at what's happening now with this Trump administration, I mean, I saw today he went to Congress and said we need to immediately stop funding PBS and NPR. You want to end Sesame Street?
Yeah.
How does that make America great? Then you take away programs that people need to survive, even though that supported him. You're taking away their basic ability to provide for themselves and their families. And yet people are saying Trump is doing a good job. Elon Musk is doing a great job. He is a genius.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You know,
But,
I don't.
but you know, and one of the things I tell people, because people say to me, and I'm going to be, and I say, you know, you are the closest you'll ever get is to survive, because like I said, you know, we have a medical system that does not pay, that is actually gets money for denying care, you know,
Mhm.
and so, you know, until people die, seriously.
Right.
And the rest of the civilized countries, the industrial countries in the world, have free healthcare. Explain that one to me.
Well, in America, healthcare is not a right; it's a privilege, right? And
Yes.
you know, somehow we, you know, the government works, of course, with corporate America to craft these, I guess, these statements or these slogans that they'll use, and you have working class people who are convinced that Social Security is an entitlement, right? That
And
healthcare is
in the
not a
meantime,
privilege.
all of us,
Mhm.
every one of us that have Social Security had a deduction from our salaries every day, every year, you know.
Right.
So I know this lady in her 80s the other day who said, if they mess with my Social Security, we march. I started laughing, but she means it.
Well, I'm sure she does. I think that for Trump, I think he's playing a very dangerous game. You know, when Trump left office in 2020, he invited people down to DC. You know, a lot of the invitation was on the dark web. Trump knew what was going to happen. This was not some surprise to him. He knew that for 12 hours they had these people out in DC being whipped up into a frenzy by people like Roger Stone, people like he used to be America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, who's now Rudolph Brokiani. Um, so these people whipped up into a frenzy. And when Trump came out to give his address to them, what did he say? We're going to walk down to the Capitol. These people were furious, and they had been whipped up into a frenzy. Well, now these people are being whipped up into a frenzy, but not because they're saying stop the steal. People being whipped up into a frenzy because they just want to live. They want to be able to keep food on the table and a roof overhead. And the person who's taking that away, I mean, people, you can talk about Joe Biden, you could talk about Hillary Clinton and the missing emails. Hell, you could talk about JFK if you want. But the person who's taking the food off the table, the person who's firing people is Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
let's be realistic. You could say, well, you know, this country was so great before Biden took office. Listen, you could live in a state of denial if you like. If you want to live in La La Land, go right ahead. But Joe Biden left office. And when he left office, the people at USAID had jobs. People in places, in countries in Africa, were getting food. Were getting things like inoculation against things like smallpox. And now we have a president that says, no, I don't think so. So,
He's also said it is illegal now to wear a mask.
right. Yeah. And
In
he,
other words, if you get sick, die.
right. And he said he had COVID at one time. Right. Yeah. Well, Sylvia, unfortunately, an hour has gone by so quickly. Um, but it was a pleasure to have you on. And, I'd like to have you on again, because there's just so much information that you have, from your warrior spirit against fighting with the government, and also just your experiences as a young woman growing up in Cuba, then living in other parts of the Caribbean, coming to this country, becoming a lawyer, living here in Pennsylvania and going out to California and continuing to fight. So, we have to have you back on, and we'll have to do this again, hopefully very, very soon.
I hope so. We are in very dangerous at time. We have to organize. We have to. We all have to organize because this could turn into more of a nightmare than it already is. Sometimes I feel like since Trump took power, 3 years have gone by.
And it hasn't been 3 months yet. But yeah, not being prepared is to do yourself and your family a disservice, because a lot of people, right? People are so stressed out right now, so afraid that they don't even want to turn on the TV to see what's happening. They don't want to read a newspaper. They just want to live, right? They just want to be able, like I said, to keep a roof overhead and keep food on the table. And it is a struggle every day. Rising cost, paychecks aren't going up, but everything else is. So, we're going to continue this conversation. We'll set up a time when you can come back, and maybe we'll have some other people on our panel. But I thank you so much, mi hermana.
Y tú también, mi hermano, for all the work you've done all these years.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, hasta luego. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, that was our show for today. And I hope that those of you who tuned in, that you got something out of this. This is a very, very dangerous time in America. Have there been times like this before? Yes. Some people might compare it to, Joe McCarthy and the Red Scare. Joe McCarthy and the Red Scare passed. This too will pass. But unfortunately, a lot of us won't be around to see it through, because this is a dangerous time. And eventually, Americans will turn on other Americans. Before, we were one nation, indivisible, right? Supposedly one nation under God. Now we are a country that is pro-Trump and a country that is anti-Trump. And eventually the forces will meet. So I hope you join me back here next Thursday, where we'll have another discussion on a Thoughtful Thursday.